Welcome back to the notes for today. We're going to start taking notes on Shakespeare and specifically Hamlet and some of the text features that we're going to study. Take a moment and stop and think about this. History, politics, and literature are filled with stories of people who sought power or fame at any cost. But success can ultimately have a dark side, as many of those individuals learned. Some were stripped of the power they found, and others found that their success came at an unexpected cost. Why do you think so many of these stories end in tragedy? Just take a moment and think about that for a second. Why do so many of these end in tragedy? Shakespeare's world. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. Shakespeare is the world's quote-unquote greatest playwright. He was a Renaissance man. The Renaissance we talked about in the previous notes was the blossoming of European learning that followed the Middle Ages. Mentioned before that the Middle Ages were God-focused, while the Renaissance was focused on human achievement. Born in 1564, England had already embraced the spirit of the Renaissance. So Shakespeare grew up in this very human-focused world, which is reflected in a lot of his plays and the thinking that's reflected in those. Elizabeth I, who ruled England from 1558 to 1603, known as the Elizabethan Age, was a huge supporter of the arts. Literature, painting, sculpture, music, theater, you name it, she supported it. By the end of the 16th century, London had more theaters than any other city in Europe. Shakespeare was affiliated specifically with Lord Chamberlain's men. In 1599, Shakespeare became part owner of the Globe Theatre, the new London home of the Lord Chamberlain's men. Queen Elizabeth sponsored the theater until her death, when King James I took over and the company became known as the King's Men. If you look at the image on the right, this is actually a picture of the redone Shakespeare's Globe in London. You can visit it. They perform plays there. Those of you that went on the UK trip last year would have seen this. We actually sat in this theater. And notice there's not a lot of room for detail. So how did they perform on this stage? Well, there weren't, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, there weren't a lot of costumes, there weren't a lot of background decorations. They just relied on vocal cues. So what you see right here is pretty much how every play would have been performed, maybe one or two props. The Globe Theatre is located on the south bank of the Thames River. It's a 3-story wooden building that held up to 3,000 theater goers in its day. Those paying the lowest admission charges, known as the groundlings, stood in the pit. So if we go back a slide, this area in front of the stage is known as the pit. So this actually curves around, and this area would be packed with people just standing. Wealthier goers sat in the building's interior galleries, so where these benches are. Now, the more wealthy, or so the wealthier you were, you would be sitting closer to the stage. Why? So everybody could look at you as well as the play and see your outfit and see how much money you'd spent to see how wealthy you are. So going to plays was definitely a theatrical show in more ways than one. It's not just about the play, it's about who sees you. Plays included something for everyone. Powerful speeches, fancy sword fights, humor, eerie supernatural events, and insightful observations about human nature. As a playwright, Shakespeare wanted to explore human behavior to understand how different people deal with universal problems. He made sure to include just enough action and excitement to keep just about anyone interested. The groundlings were particularly loud in their appreciation, cheering the heroes, yelling insults at the villains, and laughing loudly at humorous characters and jokes. By the standards of today's theater, Elizabethan performances were rather rowdy events. So typically, when you go to a play today, it's a pretty posh event. Like, you go, you dress nicely, you are quiet, you respect the actors. But these events, you came as you were, and you yelled insults when you didn't like somebody that was on stage. You cheered, and the actors would play off of what the audience was doing. And this is still true at the Globe Theater today. Now, as I mentioned before, the stage had no scenery. Usually, lines of dialogue told the audience where a scene was taking place. So there's no changes in background or props like what we see in today's theater. It'll literally be a line or two in what you're reading that says, in a dark aisle on, in the south side of London, or whatever, wherever it's meant to take place. They don't even tell you the weather. But costumes could be quite ornate. And props such as swords, shields, and swirling banners added to the colorful display. So they would, oftentimes they would get costumes donated. So these would be the clothes of the wealthy that had just been given to them, right? Or let them borrowed, if you will. From behind the stage were the sound effects. So the chiming of a clock or the sound of a cannon, for example. The Globe actually does have a cannon. It did have a cannon, and it's what caused the original one to burn down because the roof caught on fire. But anything that is written in the script, in the actual play, would have been performed or done. Performers walked on and off in full view of the audience. So people could see when you come and go. It's not like today where, people might just magically appear. What's interesting about Shakespeare's Globe is that all the actors were men. Young boys, ages 12 to 14, played the female parts. Women were not put on stage. They were considered shareholders and owned stock or shares in the play texts, costumes, and props. So whatever the profit was from a particular showing was split amongst all the actors because they technically owned a part of what was being performed. Their pay completely depended on admission sales. So the more money you made, from admissions for ticket sales, the more money you made as an individual actor. Actors only had about 3 weeks to practice a new play, and in 1 week, the acting troupe could have performed up to 6 different plays, as many as 4,000 lines. So just imagine having to remember 4 different plays at one time, or 4 different books at one time. That's a lot of memorizing. Shakespeare was baptized in April 1564 in the local church in Stratford-upon-Avon, a bustling town on the River Avon, northwest of London. He was the son of a tanner and a glove maker, and also served as a politician. So moving more towards what we're going to be analyzing in this text, let's talk about some genre elements of tragic drama. They portray the downfall of a dignified, courageous character who is generally of importance to society. So you'll have somebody of a high stature in society that, they just fail. Like, they either die or they lose everything or something happens because it's a tragedy, right? We're not going to have a happy ending. The hero's downfall occurs because of a character weakness, an error in judgment, or circumstances out of his or her control. So something happens to cause their downfall, which is an obvious statement, but sometimes that's a mistake in their judgment, sometimes it's a weakness, like a flaw that they have, and sometimes it's just, what happens to them. In tragic dramas or tragedies, events always lead to a disastrous or unhappy ending. There are no happy endings in a tragedy. So don't get your hopes up because we're reading a tragedy. Now, analyzing dramatic plot, there are several components: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. We've talked about this in the past, and I know we've gone over this pyramid before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over this. But if you're unfamiliar as to what these parts are, be sure to write them down, because we're going to be identifying where we think these plot points are in our text. In Hamlet, and in Shakespearean plays in general, we often have subplots. Subplots are stories that run parallel to the main plot. They might support the main plot by advancing the play's action or by expressing a similar theme. They often involve characters other than the main character, so the main opponent, Sorry, I should say the hero and the main opponent. So, for example, in, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a comedy, right? We have a subplot of these workers who are putting on a show for the main characters of our text, right? This is a subplot. It's something that it runs alongside of the main action or the main events, but they're not part of the main events. We do have a subplot in Hamlet, and one of them features a character named Fortinbras, who only makes 2 appearances in the play. So look out for our subplot regarding Fortinbras when we start our play next week. A foil is a character whose traits contrast with another character, and in this case, with Hamlet. Hamlet is the main character of the play Hamlet, if you haven't already figured that out, right? As we begin to read, look for a character who shares kind of a similar traits, but different than Hamlet. So the 2 will be put against one another. Similar motives, different outcomes, I guess you could say. You'll also see many allusions, metaphors, similes, personification, and imagery throughout Shakespeare's play. Throughout the play, we're also going to look at analyzing conflict. Now, conflict is a struggle between opposing forces, and plots are usually built around these. In tragic drama, conflict often has deadly consequences, literally deadly consequences. The most obvious conflict is external, involving struggles between the main character and opponents. And in a lot of Shakespeare's plays, this external conflict leads to a physical fight. So just to recap, external conflict, a struggle between the main character and opponents. So it's something that happens on the outside. Think of like a fight. Internal conflict, however, is a struggle between the self and one's own mind. So think about like the struggle you have between your heart and your brain. Your heart is telling you to do one thing, your brain is telling you to do another. That's an internal conflict. The conflict is not necessarily visible from the outside, it's all inside the person. Now, switching a little bit towards language conventions, we have several paradoxes. So a paradox is a statement that seems contradictory, but actually reveals elements of truth. For example, primitive road, no warning signs, but this is a warning sign. So it's weird, yeah? It doesn't seem quite right. For example, in Act 3, Scene 4, Hamlet says he must be cruel only to be kind. Although cruel and kind have opposing meanings, this paradox suggests that harsh actions sometimes are needed to obtain outcomes, like that tough love concept. As you read, look for more paradoxical statements, because there are many. So what are some characteristics of Shakespearean tragedy? A tragedy is a drama in which a series of actions lead to the downfall of the main character. A catastrophe is a disastrous final outcome that usually involves the death of the hero or many other heroes. So the premise of this genre, the tragedy, actually came from the Greeks. The Greeks were known for writing short plays in which they had to write, there used to be these festivals where they would have to write one comedy and then like a 3-part tragedy and another whatever, right? And they would do these plays all day, and then there would be a winner selected. Tragedies come from the Greeks, in which these crazy plot lines would come, like Oedipus, for example, if you're familiar with that, where everybody dies. Again, no happy ending. Now, a tragic hero is someone of high social rank, such as a king, a prince, or a general. This tragic hero has a tragic flaw, an error in judgment, or a character defect that ultimately leads to his or her downfall. This person suffers complete ruin or death, depending on the play, and faces his or her downfall with courage and dignity. So despite losing everything and probably having a lapse in judgment at some point, this person faces the ultimate circumstances with, courage. Shakespearean plays are divided into acts and scenes. More often than not, we have 5 acts in a Shakespearean play. Actually, I honestly can't think of a Shakespearean play that doesn't have 5 acts. Dialogue is labeled to show who is speaking. So a play is constant dialogue. There's not really a narrator. Somebody in the story will do the narrating for us. Dialogue will be, the person's name will be in bold, and then you'll have what they say. So if we were to perform this, let's say whoever is Hamlet would read wherever it says Hamlet. They would read whatever comes after that. There are also stage directions in the text. Now, stage directions are written in italics and in parentheses, and specify the setting and how characters should act. So it might say angrily to tell you how to read something, or it might say turns to Socrates or whoever, right? And that's to indicate that that person is supposed to turn to the person named and deliver their speech. So we'll see this a lot as we read, and it does take some getting used to. Now, stage directions are not to be read. So when we're reading this in class, we're not going to read the stage directions because that just tells us how to act it out. Shakespearean plays are written in blank verse. So blank verse are unrhymed lines of iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter means that there is a pattern of rhythm that has 5 unstressed syllables, each followed by a stressed syllable. So essentially there are 5 feet per line. And we'll go over this on the next slide. Most of this play, as well as Julius Caesar, as you can see here, is written in blank verse. However, some lines fall out of this order in order to create dramatic tension. In general, verse drama is where most of the dialogue is written in a metrical pattern of poetry. All of Shakespeare's plays are verse dramas. So for example, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Naturally, when you read, we have, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Those words that have this forward slash on them indicate that that's stressed. It's a place where naturally when you read, you come down a little harder on that part of the word. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? These are harder sounds. And this is iambic pentameter. So this one unstressed, the U indicates unstressed, / is stressed. So this is 1 foot, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet per line. So this is also iambic pentameter because there are 5 unstressed and stressed. So unstressed and then stressed. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 per line. And the difference between blank verse and free verse, although there are several, is that blank verse does not have rhymed lines, as where free verse will have some rhymed lines. So this text is written in iambic pentameter. Part of the reason is because when it's written in this sort of beat, the lines were easier to remember. They were easier to memorize because remember, they have to memorize like 4,000 lines a week. A soliloquy is a long speech in a play in which a character talks to himself or herself. The character is alone on stage or unaware of the presence of others. So in a soliloquy, the person is giving a speech regardless of any hearers. They don't care who else is around, especially another character in the play. Soliloquies help develop characters by revealing their motivations and inner conflicts. So this is where we'll find out that somebody has this inner conflict. They're going to give this whole speech about, I don't know what to do, whatever, right? And there's a very famous example of this in Hamlet, which you might be familiar with. Soliloquies can also express themes or hint at actions to come. So for example, if I'm thinking about doing something in my soliloquy, I will say what it is I'm thinking about doing and why. Shakespeare uses a variety of techniques in his soliloquies, such as allusions, metaphors, similes, personification, powerful imagery, and careful word choices. Shakespeare very, very intricately wrote not just the soliloquies, but all parts of his plays so that everything has a significance. So we're going to pay attention to these literary devices as we study soliloquies. Similarly, an aside is a character's remark either to the audience or to another character that no one else on stage is supposed to hear. So think of it as this. When you are listening to somebody speak and you have something you want to say to your best friend who's right next to you, you turn to them and you kind of whisper something to them, or you mention something to them. This is an aside. So Hamlet, not just Hamlet, but characters in Shakespeare's plays will also do this, and the information is only meant to be directed either at the audience, so that the character could potentially turn to the audience and be telling them something, or is directed at another character and they don't want anybody else to hear. It's like a secret. This lets the audience in on the character's thoughts or secrets. It can be the same as a soliloquy in the sense that we learn more information than we previously knew, but aside is only meant to be directed at the person, whoever they're saying. And it'll say in the text, aside to whatever, to whomever, whatever. Now we're also going to take a look at dramatic irony. Dramatic irony results when the audience knows more than one or more of the characters. For example, Caesar does not know that people are plotting against him, but the audience does. This helps build suspense. So it's when we know something as the audience that the characters involved don't know. For example, this cartoon, first he warms our bowl, now he's feeding us, and you thought he wasn't friendly, but we know he's really trying to cook them. The poor fish don't know that. Now, Shakespeare can be pretty difficult to understand just because it's written in a language that is different from ours. And so there are words that, we don't use, like ear, which means before, or durst, dared. So here's a brief key of some of the ones that come up a lot, although your book does a really good job of writing next to the words that we might not be familiar with, like in the margins, what that word means. So just utilize the text to help you. Look at the footnotes, look at the side notes so that you can keep track of what's going on. But again, if you want to jot these down, it's not a horrible idea. Repetition. So we're looking at rhetorical devices, the first of which, repetition. It's the use of words or phrases more than once to emphasize ideas. Therein, ye gods, you make the weak most strong. Therein, ye gods, you tyrants do defeat. So this is from Julius Caesar again, but therein, ye gods, you is repeated in each one, right? So it doesn't have to be whole sentences repeated. It can even be like, let's say, only more weak and strong were repeated here and here, which isn't the case, but it can be one word that's repeated in different lines. It's still an example of repetition. So don't be confused by repetition meaning, oh, the whole line has to be repeated. It doesn't have to be. Next, we have parallelism. So parallelism is the repetition of grammatical structures to express ideas that are related or of equal importance. Not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. So this syntax is identical, so they're parallel. They go against one another. They run alongside one another. I should rephrase that. We also have rhetorical questions. So the use of questions that require no answer to make the speaker's rightness seem self-evident. Wherein hath Caesar thus deserved your love? Alas, you know not. So where has Caesar deserved this kind of love? Because they kill him, right? Or when somebody says, like, are you serious? Do you really expect an answer to that? No, it's a question you don't expect an answer to. And when people answer it, you give them this look, like, really? Really? What? You're answering me? So a rhetorical question is a question that is asked that you don't intend to hear a specific answer for. Now, overall, we're probably thinking, why do we still read Shakespeare's work today? And mostly it's about character. One reason Shakespeare has endured may be because his characters, figures from history and his imagination transcend any particular time or place. All of his characters are relatable, even to us. We have the same aspirations. We have the same, downfalls as humans. And so people continue to read his plays. Archetypes are familiar character types that appear over and over again in literature. The scheming characters and conspiracies at the heart of the tragedy of Julius Caesar are as relevant today as they were in Shakespeare's time. And arguably, Hamlet, this is the same, right? We have our hero, we have our rebel, we have our villain. These are all things that we relate to. They're familiar character types. We know what a villain looks like. Just think of every superhero movie. Here are some more examples. You don't have to write these down, but I just threw them in for your reference. And that wraps up our notes on Hamlet. So please make sure that you took thorough notes. Make sure you wrote everything down that you might need for a future exam. All right, have a great day, and I will see you in the next lesson.